Hello, what is going on, guys? Hockey Guy 1 here. Welcome to my review of Tenet. So Tenet is directed by Christopher Nolan and stars John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Elizabeth Debicki, and Kenneth Branagh. Story is basically about the protagonist who works for this organization called Tenet, which is basically this organization to try and ensure the future, and it's kind of this weird inverted kind of technology, and it does end up eventually stealing this one artifact from Sator, and then eventually fake giving him an empty briefcase, and ends up kind of causing Kate shot by these kind of inverted bullets, and it kind of makes the world kind of be inverted, and basically they have to go back. So last time Kat and Sator was happy together, basically to kind of get this algorithm to try and basically retrieve that algorithm to basically make sure that they're not inverted anymore, basically. So the story is very good, and there's a lot to it. It's very deep and complex, and they definitely do a lot to the story. They put a lot of elements on top of each other, and you really do have to pay attention to really fully understand the story, and I do think that this movie does do a really good job executing its story. I like this type of story, and it's basically the whole kind of inverted kind of thing, and how you get to kind of ensure the future. And basically, I really like this kind of story. I do think that they do a really good job with the story, and definitely does put a lot on top of it for kind of a small idea, and they definitely do a good job kind of developing this into a story, and I do feel like they do a good job keeping you and keeping a consistent story throughout, and just really the structure of this movie is really good. I really like how the first act kind of gets you into it immediately by showing this action scene, and I feel like that does really get you into this movie, and it definitely starts off really well and helps you get into the mindset of the movie. And then there's the whole thing where he's basically kind of getting shot, and it seems and kind of capture and torture and stuff. And it does feel like that does really set up the whole thing with the protagonist getting tortured. And then they kind of got the whole second act where he realizes kind of recruited by Tenet, and I do really like this entire second act. There's a lot on top of the second act, and it definitely is a lot, and you have to really pay attention, especially during this second act of this movie. But I do feel like that they do a good job, kind of keeping it connected with each other and making each element of the story kind of continuous and connecting to each other, and it does really work for the second act, especially as even if they're having a lot to it, with him going on these whole kind of things, and as well as just the whole kind of inverted part. It definitely does feel like multiple movies into one, but I do feel like the execution is what really helped it out a lot, and I do feel like it just makes it feel a bit more consistent. Then you got the whole third act, which basically you have them converted it to stop his algorithm, and Cat with Sator, and I really like that, and it is a really good climax. It makes you feel like all the tension in this movie they kind of built up, as there's a lot with Sator literally just before this, and I do feel like that just made it feel worth it because it built up to it, and I do really like how they ended up doing this, especially the whole thing where have Cat kind of end Sator, and it definitely does make sense. And then the whole ending in this movie where the protagonist kind of says that he's protagonist, and basically he is to ensure the future Tenet, and they're killing the main Tenet member, and I feel like just that just really work for the ending of this movie, and I just think that it just really works, and it just feels like a good kind of conclusion to this, and tells you kind of how the things were kind of in the future. Pacing is really good, as they do a good job bringing it out to the runtime of 2 hours and 30 minutes, as the movie does feel like it's complete, and they do a really good job with the movie, and making it feel like it's complete, and definitely does feel like that there's enough to it, and basically kind of that it's long enough. The action was really good, especially like the opening scene. Like it got you right into the movie with an opening scene, an action scene, and it really is entertaining. Like the whole orchestra thing, and how they're kind of like fighting each other. And I do really like that action scene. They get you right into the movie, and it just is really engaging. And the same thing can be said about the whole car chase scene. Like it's just really engaging, and it gets you really into the movie, and it makes the film like really entertaining to watch with the whole action scenes, and each one in this movie is really good. I got the protagonist, who's literally called the protagonist in this movie, as he really only says his real name once, and other than that, she really goes by the protagonist in this movie, and I feel like his character in general, I feel like they do a pretty good job with his character. I mean, just the whole kind of character growth that he kind of has, and like realizing that he's the future of Tenet, that kind of thing. And I do think that makes sense, like, especially in the ending when he like kills the later Tenet, and it like fulfilled him in that spot, and it definitely really works. It kind of like shows his character growth and like, kind of more understanding, and especially like when you can see how he's kind of in like fighting himself in that one scene. I mean, that was a really interesting scene, to say the least. That kind of really shows his character, and you can just see how much he was like trying to get through in this whole mission, and it definitely really works for this movie. And I do really like how they did his character in this movie. Neil is a rather interesting character, to say the least. I mean, his character is done really well. I do feel like it. He's definitely a rather interesting character, to say the least. I mean, you kind of like have a big reveal that he's kind of like sent from the future, and like there's a whole lot more to him. And I do really like how he's kind of like portrayed as that kind of character, and I do feel like it works well into the story, and does work well in this movie, like how they ended up doing his character. And I just really got invested in his character and just found him to be really interesting. Kat is a really interesting character. I mean, they kind of like show how she doesn't really get along with Sator anymore, and just kind of just how she doesn't really like him in many different scenes. And I do feel like it just makes her character a bit more interesting and makes her a bit more inventive, and definitely does work for the types of the story this is, and works into this, and as well as just kind of like how she's kind of in more of the protagonist, and I do think that makes more sense for her characters. She does do a pretty good job with her character, and they do a good job like writing her character, and I enough to like find her interesting and find me invested with her character. So Tor is basically the closest thing to a villain that this movie has. I mean, he's kind of the villain. I mean, but like he's not exactly a villain, but I do think that like the role that they kind of portray him in this movie, they do a pretty good job kind of like writing his character. I mean, basically, just he's kind of intimidating, if I'm being honest, and seeing they kind of show him, like, it does show him they kind of interrogating Ken, like basically shooting these inverted bullets at him, her, and it just really kind of like works for scary. I mean, it makes him a bit more intimidating as he does kind of like go after him, and basically he just kind of like wants Downium kind of stand up, and it does really work for his specific character, and I do think that from what his role serves in this movie, they did a pretty good job with him. The acting is really good. John David Washington did a really good job as the protagonist, as his line delivery is on point. He really feels like the character in each and every scene, and just gives out a really confident performance, and it's definitely, you can tell that he's into it. Same thing goes for Robert Pattinson as Neil. He especially did a great job in his role, and I felt like he stood out in this movie. And same thing goes for Kenneth Branagh. I feel like he did a pretty good job as Sator, and definitely does stand out in this movie, and he did a pretty good job in his role, and just really feels like the character whenever he's kind of line delivering. And there's also Elizabeth Debicki, who did a pretty good job in the role as Kat, as she did really feel like the character. She did really try in her role, and overall, like, felt like the character and felt really confident with her line delivery. The cinematography was fantastic. Each camera angle really worked for each scene that they used it in, and I feel like it really did capture the moment well and really did feel like you're a bit more into the moment with how they kind of captured it, especially like when they're kind of like showing a lot of characters' emotions. They did a really good job kind of showing that, and especially the cinematography stands out in the opening scene. Like they did a really good job kind of like using camera angles to their advantage to really make the landscape feel more in it, and I do feel like they did a really good job with cinematography in this movie, just making it really feel kind of more big, and basically just kind of doing a good job, like showing characters' emotions as well as just kind of showing the landscape of the scene. The lighting is pretty good, as when it's night, you can see what's going on. They do still kind of like give the effect of night, and you can still see what's going on, so they did do a really good job with the lighting in this movie, as you can still see what's going on throughout this movie. The editing is really good, as basically there are a lot of camera angles that they used during action scenes, and I do feel like they did a good job kind of like smoothly transitioning and making it feel like a smooth transition, and they do a really good job with it. Also, like when they transition between scenes, I feel like a really good job, especially like when the protagonist kind of like getting like I said, towards kind of henchman, and it kind of like zooms right to the very next scene where he's kind of like lieutenant, and I really think that cut especially really worked, and I do feel like each time they do those kind of cuts, these really work for their scenes, and they do a really good job kind of like having smooth transitions from one scene to another, so from one camera angle to another. The set designs were really good, as they did a pretty good job like kind of capturing like the whole feeling of Britain when they were like kind of in Britain, as well as same thing with like just about every single set there, and it's pretty good. Like I like the whole kind of like, cruise set as it is really good and like feels like a cruise, and same thing like the whole kind of like all the locations they kind of chose for the climax just really worked. And I do also really like how they kind of like made the whole kind of like Tenet room at the beginning, and it just really worked. Same thing with like that airplane set, it really worked for it, and I really like the way they designed it. Then the score is really good, as it just really keeps you into the moments, and it does like really match the kind of tone of the movie and just the tone of the scenes that they're in. It just really works for me. Even if Hans Zimmer is not doing the score for this time, it still did a really good job kind of like keeping it smooth, and it's like making you really feel in the moment, and did a really good job with the score of this movie. So overall, Tenet is another fantastic movie from Christopher Nolan, and is a masterpiece, and definitely the best movie of the year so far. So I'm going to give Tenet a 10 out of 10. That was my review of Tenet. What are your thoughts on Tenet? Tell me in the comments below. I'd like to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.